The SEALs were seconds from death, until a hidden sniper opened fire from the rock's Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison pressed his back against the jagged alien rock formation, feeling the heat from plasma bolts searing the air inches from his face. His tactical display showed red dots everywhere. At least 40 Zephyrian warriors had them pinned, down in this narrow canyon on the planet Kepler 442b. The mission had gone sideways fast. Contact left. Contact left! Petty Officer Rodriguez shouted over the comm, his voice barely audible above the whining screech of alien energy weapons. The distinctive blue-white flash of Zephyrian plasma rifles lit up the canyon walls like deadly lightning. Morrison's team of 8 Navy SEALs had been sent to retrieve classified data from a downed human research vessel. The ship had crashed 3 days ago during a routine survey mission, and intelligence suggested the crew might still be alive. What intel hadn't mentioned was the Zephyrian patrol that had already reached the crash site. "Sir, we're getting hammered from 3 sides," Sergeant Mills called out, his voice tight with controlled panic. "They've got us in a kill box." Morrison checked his ammunition counter, 43 rounds left in his MA-47 assault rifle. Around him, his team was spread behind whatever cover they could find in the alien landscape. The rocks here were unlike anything on Earth. Twisted formations of crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Beautiful, but right now they were the only thing keeping his men alive. The Zephyrians were methodical killers, standing nearly 8 feet tall with elongated limbs and reptilian features. They moved with predatory grace through the canyon. Their plasma weapons could punch through standard body armor like it was paper, and their tactical coordination was flawless. Humanity had been at war with them for 6 years, ever since first contact had gone catastrophically wrong. Morrison, Chief Petty Officer Torres, crawled up beside him, his dark face streaked with sweat and alien dust. "We've got wounded. Jenkins took a plasma burst to the shoulder, and Williams is bleeding bad from shrapnel." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. They were outnumbered 5-1, low on ammunition and trapped in terrain that favored the enemy. Morrison's mind raced through options, but none of them looked good. The extraction point was 2 kilometers away through open ground. They'd never make it. "Rodriguez, can you raise fleet command?" Morrison barked into his comm unit. "Negative, sir. Something's jamming our long-range communications. Local tactical net only." Another volley of plasma fire erupted from the canyon rim above them. The Zephyrians had positioned snipers on the high ground, cutting off any retreat. One of the bolts struck the rock near Morrison's head, sending superheated fragments spinning through the air. He felt the heat wash over his face and knew they were running out of time. The sound of Zephyrian war cries echoed off the canyon walls, a bone-chilling harmony that sounded like screaming wind. Morrison had heard it before during the Battle of New Sarajevo. It meant they were preparing for a final assault. "They're moving in," Mills reported, his scope trained on the canyon entrance. "Multiple contacts advancing on our position." Morrison made a quick calculation. If they stayed put, they'd be overrun in minutes. If they tried to run, they'd be cut down in the open. There was a third option, but it was essentially suicide. A direct assault up the canyon wall to try and take out the sniper positions. At least they'd die fighting. "Listen up," he said over the comm, keeping his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We're going to—" The crack of a high-powered rifle echoed through the canyon, different from anything Morrison had heard before. It wasn't the whine of plasma or the bark of human weapons. This was something else entirely. One of the Zephyrian snipers on the rim above them suddenly pitched forward, dark fluid spraying from what had been its head. The body tumbled down the canyon wall, crashing onto the rocks below with a wet thud. "What the hell was that?" Torres whispered, scanning the opposite canyon wall through his scope. Another shot rang out, and a second Zephyrian sniper jerked backward, its weapon flying from nerveless claws. The remaining aliens began chittering in their harsh language, clearly confused by this new threat. Morrison pressed himself against the rock and tried to locate the source of the shots. The reports were coming from somewhere high up in the maze of crystal formations across the canyon, but he couldn't see the shooter. Whoever it was had to be at least 800 meters away, making precision shots with what sounded like a chemical propellant weapon, old-school kinetic rounds. The mysterious sniper continued picking off targets with mechanical precision. Each shot found its mark, and each Zephyrian that fell sent ripples of confusion through their organized assault. The aliens had never encountered this kind of long-range precision before. "Sir," Rodriguez called out, "the Zephyrians are pulling back." Some of them are repositioning to hunt for the sniper. Morrison watched through his tactical scope as roughly half the alien force began moving toward the opposite canyon wall, their formation breaking up as they searched for this new threat. It was the first tactical advantage his team had gained since the ambush began, but questions burned in his mind. Who was up there? How had they gotten into position without being detected? And why were they helping a stranded human patrol? The answer to those questions would determine whether his team lived through the next few minutes, or died in this alien canyon light years from home. As another rifle shot echoed through the rocks and another Zephyrian fell, Morrison began to suspect that humanity wasn't as alone on this planet as they'd thought. The SEALs were seconds from death. Part 2, the mysterious sniper's precision was unlike anything Morrison had witnessed in 6 years of fighting Zephyrians. Each shot seemed to anticipate where the aliens would move next, leading targets that were already in motion. The sound of the weapon was distinctive, a deep, resonant crack that suggested heavy kinetic rounds, possibly armor-piercing. "Torres, can you get a read on the shooter's position?" Morrison asked, keeping his voice low as another Zephyrian dropped from the canyon rim. "Negative, sir. Too much interference from these crystal formations. But whoever it is, they're using the terrain like they've been here for years." The tactical situation was shifting in their favor, but Morrison knew it wouldn't last. The Zephyrians were intelligent warriors who adapted quickly to new threats. They were already spreading out, using their remaining numbers to pressure his position, while sending hunting parties after the sniper. Suddenly, the firing pattern changed. Instead of single, precise shots, Morrison heard a rapid series of reports. 3 quick cracks followed by the distinctive whine of ricochets. The sniper was engaging multiple targets simultaneously, something that should have been impossible at that range. "Multiple hostiles down," Rodriguez reported, his voice filled with amazement. "Sir, I count at least 12 Zephyrian KIAs and they're starting to panic." Morrison had never seen Zephyrians panic before. Their reptilian features made emotions difficult to read, but their movements were becoming erratic, unpredictable. The methodical advance had dissolved into confused skirmishing as squad leaders barked orders in their harsh language. Through his scope, Morrison caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. High up on the canyon wall, barely visible among the twisted crystal formations, he saw the outline of what looked like a human figure. But something was wrong with the proportions. Too tall, too broad across the shoulders. "Rodriguez, you seeing this?" Morrison adjusted his scope's magnification, trying to get a clearer view. "Holy shit, sir. Is that—" Another shot rang out, and the Zephyrian squad leader closest to Morrison's position spun around, dark fluid spraying from its chest. As the alien fell, Morrison heard something that made his heart race. A human voice carried on the alien wind, speaking in accented English. "American soldiers, can you hear me?" The voice came from their tactical frequency, which should have been impossible. Their communications were encrypted with military-grade algorithms, and no unauthorized personnel should have access. Morrison keyed his comm unit cautiously. "This is Lieutenant Commander Morrison, United States Navy. Identify yourself." "My name is Colonel Mikhail Petrov, formerly of the Russian Spetsnaz. I have been on this planet for 3 years." The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. 3 years ago, a joint Russian-American expedition had been lost in this sector. All hands were presumed dead when their ship failed to return from what was supposed to be a routine mapping mission. "Petrov, how did you survive? Where's the rest of your team?" "That is a long story, Commander. Right now, we need to focus on keeping you alive. The Zephyrians are regrouping for another assault, and they have called for reinforcements." As if summoned by Petrov's words, Morrison heard the distinctive howl of Zephyrian atmospheric fighters in the distance. The aliens had air support incoming, which meant his team's situation was about to become impossible. "Petrov, we need immediate extraction. Can you provide overwatch while we move to the LZ?" "Negative, Commander. The landing zone is compromised. Zephyrian ground forces are already in position there, but I know this terrain. There is another way." Morrison watched as several Zephyrians attempted to flank his position, only to be cut down by precise rifle fire from the canyon walls. Petrov's shooting was supernatural. Shots that curved around obstacles, finding targets that should have been impossible to hit. "Torres, get Williams stabilized for movement," Morrison ordered. "We're going to have to trust our new friend." "Sir," Mills called out, "how do we know this isn't some kind of trap? How do we know this guy is really human?" It was a valid question. Shape-shifting aliens weren't unheard of in this war, and the Zephyrians were known for their psychological warfare tactics. But the shooting, no alien weapon Morrison had encountered could make those kinds of precision shots with what sounded like chemical propellants. Petrov, prove you're human. Tell me something only a human would know. There was a pause, then the Russian's voice came back with a hint of dark humor. Commander, 3 years ago I was eating borscht and complaining about American coffee. Today I would kill for either one. Also, your Sergeant Mills has been checking his ammunition count every 30 seconds for the past 10 minutes. Very bad habit in combat. Morrison looked at Mills, who was indeed checking his magazine again. The observation was too specific, too immediate to be anything but genuine. Rodriguez, can you see how many hostiles are still active? Sir? Thermal imaging shows approximately 25 Zephyrians still moving, but they're spread out across the canyon. Looks like they're trying to surround our position. The sound of the approaching fighters was getting louder. Morrison estimated they had maybe 3 minutes before Zephyrian air support arrived and turned this rescue into a crater. Petrov, we need to move now. What's your plan? There is a cave system beneath the canyon floor. I have been using it for 3 years to move undetected. The entrance is 50 meters from your current position, but we will need to create a diversion to reach it safely. Morrison looked at his wounded men, then at the Zephyrian position surrounding them. Whatever Petrov had in mind, it was their only chance. Talk to me, Colonel. What kind of diversion? The kind that will make the Zephyrians think twice about following us underground, Commander. I hope your men are ready for a fight. The SEALs were seconds from death. Part 3, the cave entrance, was exactly where Petrov had said it would be. A narrow fissure in the crystalline rock face that looked like nothing more than a shadow. Morrison's team had fought their way across 50 meters of open ground under covering fire from their mysterious benefactor, losing precious ammunition but no more men. Jesus Christ, Torres whispered as they squeezed through the opening. How did you find this place, Petrov? The Russian's voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness ahead. When you have been hunted by Zephyrians for 3 years, you learn to see what others miss. Keep moving. They will not follow us immediately, but they will come. The cave system was unlike anything in Morrison's experience. The walls pulsed with the same inner light as the surface formations, casting an eerie blue-green glow that made navigation possible without artificial illumination. The tunnel they followed seemed to have been carved by water over millennia, smooth and curved like an alien highway. Williams, how are you holding up? Morrison checked on his wounded man as they moved deeper into the mountain. Still breathing, sir, but I'm leaving a blood trail Helen Keller could follow. Morrison had been thinking the same thing. If the Zephyrians decided to pursue them underground, the wounded man's blood would make tracking easy. But they had no choice. Williams couldn't survive another firefight on the surface. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, and Morrison's tactical light revealed something that made him stop in his tracks. The cavern was filled with human equipment, weapons, communication gear, medical supplies, even what looked like a small workshop. It was clearly a long-term base of operations. Welcome to my home. Petrov's voice came from the shadows, and then the man himself stepped into the light. Morrison had seen a lot of soldiers in his career, but Colonel Mikhail Petrov was something else entirely. He stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, his frame filled out with the kind of muscle that came from years of hard living. His hair had gone completely gray, and his face was marked with scars that spoke of countless battles. But it was his eyes that struck Morrison most. They held the kind of focused intensity that came from prolonged combat stress. The weapon in Petrov's hands was a work of art. It appeared to be a heavily modified rifle, but built from a combination of human and alien technology. The scope was clearly Zephyrian in origin, but the barrel and action looked like they'd been handcrafted from salvaged materials. Colonel. Morrison extended his hand. Good to meet you face to face. Petrov's grip was like steel. Likewise, Commander, though I wish it were under better circumstances. His accent was thick, but his English was precise. We do not have much time. The Zephyrians will send scouts into the caves within the hour. How many of your people survived the crash? Morrison asked, setting Williams down on what appeared to be a makeshift medical table. Petrov's expression darkened. I am the only one left, Commander. The others... He trailed off, then seemed to steel himself. The crash killed most of them immediately. The survivors lasted 3 months before the Zephyrians found our camp. The weight of 3 years of solitary survival was evident in every line of Petrov's face. Morrison had served in some of the worst combat zones humanity had to offer, but he couldn't imagine fighting alone against an alien species for 3 years. "How have you stayed alive all this time?" "The Zephyrians think like predators," Petrov explained, moving to examine Williams's wounds with practiced efficiency. "They hunt in patterns, follow established routes, rely on their technology. But this planet, it teaches you different lessons." As Petrov worked on Williams, Morrison noticed something odd about the Russian's hands. They moved with inhuman precision, and there seemed to be faint scars running along his fingers and wrists. When Petrov reached for a medical instrument, Morrison caught a glimpse of what looked like metal beneath the skin. "Petrov, what happened to your hands?" The Russian paused in his work, then held up his left hand. In the pulsing light of the crystals, Morrison could see that Petrov's fingers had been surgically enhanced with what appeared to be alien technology. "The Zephyrians are not the only intelligent species on this planet, Commander. 3 years alone teaches you to be resourceful." Before Morrison could ask more questions, Rodriguez's voice crackled over the comm. "Sir, I'm picking up movement in the tunnels. Multiple contacts approaching our position." Petrov immediately moved to a wall covered with hand-drawn maps of the cave system. "They found our trail faster than expected. We need to move deeper." "What's down there?" Morrison asked, helping Williams to his feet. "The reason the Zephyrians are really here, Commander, and possibly the key to winning this war." The sound of alien voices echoed through the tunnels, the distinctive chittering and hissing of Zephyrian communication. They were getting closer, and Morrison could hear the characteristic whine of their plasma weapons charging. "Sir," Mills whispered, "we're down to maybe 200 rounds total. If we get cornered again..." Petrov shouldered his modified rifle and moved toward a tunnel that sloped deeper into the mountain. "Follow me. And Commander, prepare your men for something they have never seen before." As they moved deeper into the alien mountain, Morrison noticed that the crystal formations were becoming more complex, more organized. The patterns in the walls seemed almost deliberate, like a vast circuit board carved into living rock. And somewhere in the distance he could hear something that made his skin crawl, a low rhythmic humming that seemed to pulse in time with the lights. "Petrov, what is that sound?" The Russian's grin was fierce and slightly mad. "That, Commander, is why I have been able to kill Zephyrians for 3 years. That is the real secret of this planet." Behind them, the alien voices were getting closer, and Morrison realized they were about to discover something that would change everything he thought he knew about this war. The seals were seconds from death. Part 4. The tunnel opened into a cathedral-sized chamber that defied everything Morrison understood about geology. The walls were covered in geometric patterns that pulsed with synchronized light, creating a complex rhythm that seemed to respond to their presence. But it wasn't the alien architecture that made Morrison's team freeze in their tracks. It was what occupied the center of the chamber. A massive crystalline structure rose from the cavern floor, easily 30 meters tall and shaped like a twisted spire. But this wasn't just rock. It was clearly artificial, constructed with purpose and intelligence. And it was alive with energy, crackling streams of power flowing through its faceted surface like liquid lightning. "What the hell is that thing?" Torres whispered, his voice barely audible over the humming that filled the air. Petrov moved toward the structure with the confidence of long familiarity. "The Zephyrians call it a nexus point, but I have learned its true name from its creators, the architects." "Architects?" Morrison kept his weapon ready, scanning the chamber for threats. "You mean there's another species involved in this?" "Not another species, Commander. The first species. The ones who built the infrastructure that connects every habitable world in this galaxy." The implications hit Morrison like a physical blow. If what Petrov was saying was true, then the entire war between humanity and the Zephyrians was being fought over technology that belonged to a third party, a species that had apparently mastered interstellar engineering on a scale neither side could comprehend. "These architects, where are they now?" Petrov's expression grew somber. "Gone has been for millions of years. But their machines still function, still maintain the network they built to connect the stars." The sound of Zephyrian voices echoed from the tunnel behind them, getting closer. Morrison's team was trapped in the chamber with no obvious exit. But Petrov seemed unconcerned. The Zephyrians have been trying to control these nexus points for decades. Petrov continued, approaching the crystalline spire. They can use them to travel instantaneously between star systems, to coordinate their fleets across impossible distances. But they never learned to communicate with the network itself. And you did? Instead of answering, Petrov placed his modified hand against the surface of the nexus point. The moment his skin made contact, the entire structure blazed with light, and the humming sound increased to an almost painful volume. Morrison watched in amazement as patterns of light raced up and down the spire's surface, and suddenly he could feel something, a presence vast and ancient, touching the edges of his consciousness. The architects built their network to be used by intelligence, not just technology, Petrov explained, his voice strangely echoing in the chamber. The Zephyrians try to force their way in, to dominate the system, but it responds to cooperation, to understanding. The presence in Morrison's mind grew stronger, and suddenly he could sense things beyond the physical chamber. He could feel the locations of every Zephyrian on the planet, could perceive their ships in orbit, could even sense other nexus points scattered across nearby star systems. Rodriguez? Williams, everyone, touch the structure, Morrison ordered, understanding instinctively what needed to happen. As each of his team members made contact with the nexus point, the network's awareness expanded to include them. Morrison could feel their thoughts, their experiences, their tactical knowledge flowing into the vast alien system. Sir, Mills gasped, I can see everything. The entire Zephyrian fleet, their positions, their plans, it's all here. The Zephyrian voices in the tunnel had stopped, replaced by sounds of confusion and alarm. Through the network, Morrison could sense their panic as the aliens realized that the nexus point had activated in a way they'd never experienced before. The architects designed this system to be used by species that had learned to work together, Petrov explained, individual minds connecting to form something greater. The Zephyrians cannot do this. Their culture is too hierarchical, too focused on dominance. Morrison felt the truth of Petrov's words resonating through the network. The architects had built their galactic infrastructure for civilizations that had evolved beyond the need for conquest, for species that could set aside their differences to achieve something greater together. But they've been using the nexus points for years, Torres pointed out, his hand still pressed against the crystalline surface. Using them, yes, but only at the most basic level, crude transportation and communication. They never understood the deeper functions, the true capabilities of the network. Through his connection to the system, Morrison could feel those deeper capabilities awakening. The nexus point wasn't just a transportation hub. It was a node in a galaxy-spanning intelligence, a mechanism for coordinating activities across unimaginable distances. And right now, it was very unhappy with the Zephyrians. The network has been watching this war, Morrison realized, the knowledge flowing into his mind from the alien system. It's been waiting for humans to find it. Why? Rodriguez asked. The answer came not in words but in images and sensations flowing through the connection. The architects had built their network for species like humanity, chaotic, creative, capable of both individual achievement and collective cooperation. The Zephyrians represented everything the architects had sought to move beyond: rigid hierarchy, technological stagnation, the worship of conquest over discovery. The network wants to help us, Morrison said, the certainty of it filling his mind. It's been waiting for a species that could use it the way it was meant to be used. The sound of plasma weapons firing echoed through the tunnel, but Morrison wasn't concerned. Through the network, he could feel the nexus point's response to the Zephyrian attack. Defensive systems that had been dormant for millions of years were coming online. Commander, Williams said, his voice filled with wonder despite his injuries. I can see the way home. Not just to our extraction point, home to Earth. The network can take us anywhere. But Morrison's tactical mind was already thinking beyond escape. If humans could access the full capabilities of the architect network, if they could learn to use it as it was intended, then the balance of the war would shift completely. Petrov, how long have you been connected to this system? The Russian's smile was grim. 3 years, Commander. Long enough to learn that this war is not what either side believes it to be, and long enough to prepare for the day when other humans would arrive. The Zephyrian voices in the tunnel had been replaced by sounds of retreat, and Morrison understood why. The network was defending itself now, and no force the aliens possessed could stand against technology that had been built by a civilization that had mastered the galaxy. The SEALs were seconds from death. Part 5. The Nexus Point's defensive systems were beyond anything Morrison had imagined. Through his connection to the network, he could feel automated guardians activating throughout the cave system, energy barriers that could stop plasma fire, gravity fields that could crush attacking forces, and most terrifying of all, the ability to selectively manipulate the planet's atmosphere in localized areas. The Zephyrian assault force that had been pursuing them was learning this the hard way. Morrison could sense their panic through the network as their plasma weapons simply stopped functioning, their power cells drained by invisible forces. Several of the aliens had already fled back to the surface, chittering frantically about cursed caves and demon technology. This is why the Zephyrians have never been able to fully control a nexus point, Petrov explained, his hand still pressed against the crystalline surface. The network judges species by their actions, not their words. It has been watching the Zephyrians for decades, and it does not approve. Through the connection, Morrison could access the network's vast memory banks. He saw images of Zephyrian fleets bombarding inhabited worlds, of civilian populations being enslaved, of ancient structures being destroyed in fits of cultural vandalism. The architects had built their network to serve civilizations that had evolved beyond such brutality. Rodriguez, can you access our communications through this thing? Morrison asked, an idea forming in his tactical mind. Sir, I think I can do a lot more than that. The network has monitoring stations throughout this entire sector. I can see every Zephyrian ship, every troop movement, every supply convoy. The strategic implications were staggering. For 6 years, humanity had been fighting a defensive war against an enemy that seemed to know their every move. But the Zephyrians had achieved their tactical advantage by forcing their way into the lowest levels of the Architect network. Crude hack jobs that gave them communication and transportation, but not true access. Mills, Torres, what are you seeing? Morrison asked his other team members. Sir, Mills responded, his voice filled with amazement. I can see their entire battle plan for this sector. They're planning a major offensive against the Tau Ceti colony. 3 battle groups launching in 72 hours. And I can see their supply routes, Torres added. The network has been tracking every ship, every cargo transfer, every fuel depot. It's all here, laid out like a tactical map. Morrison felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. For years, human forces had been reacting to Zephyrian initiatives, always one step behind, always fighting from a position of disadvantage. But with access to the Architect network, they could turn the tables completely. Petrov, how many of these nexus points are there? Thousands, Commander. Maybe tens of thousands. The Architects built them on every world that could support life, connected by instantaneous communication and transportation links. It is the greatest infrastructure project in galactic history. The presence in Morrison's mind shifted, and suddenly he could feel something vast and purposeful reaching out across space. The network was awakening other nodes, calling to them across impossible distances. And from those distant points, Morrison sensed responses, acknowledgments from nexus points on worlds throughout human space. Williams, how are you feeling? Morrison asked his wounded teammate. Sir, this is going to sound crazy, but I think this thing is healing me. The pain in my shoulder is almost gone, and I can feel something working on the internal damage. Morrison wasn't surprised. Through the network, he could sense the medical capabilities built into every nexus point. Alien technology that could repair damage at the cellular level, that could enhance human capabilities in ways their species had never imagined. The Architects designed their network to serve as more than just transportation, Petrov explained. It was meant to be a tool for species that had achieved true interstellar civilization, to help them grow, to enhance their capabilities, to connect them with others who shared their values. The implications were overwhelming. If humanity could learn to use the network properly, they wouldn't just win the war against the Zephyrians, they would join the ranks of truly galactic civilizations. But first, they had to survive the next few hours. Sir, Rodriguez reported, I'm detecting massive Zephyrian ship movements in orbit. Looks like they're calling in reinforcements. At least a dozen heavy cruisers moving to bombard the planet's surface. Through the network, Morrison could feel the Zephyrians' growing desperation. They had realized that something fundamental had changed, that their carefully planned operation was falling apart. Their response was typically brutal, If they couldn't control the nexus point, they would destroy it, even if it meant glassing the entire planet. Can the network defend against orbital bombardment? Morrison asked. Petrov's smile was cold and satisfied. Commander, the architects built this network to survive anything. Watch. Through his connection to the system, Morrison felt the network reaching out into space, touching the Zephyrian ships with invisible tendrils of force. What happened next defied every law of physics Morrison thought he understood. The Zephyrian cruisers simply stopped. Not slowed down, not redirected, stopped as if they had hit an invisible wall in the vacuum of space. Their engines continued to fire, but the ships remained motionless, trapped by forces that human science couldn't begin to explain. How is that possible? Torres whispered. The architects mastered technologies that most species never discover, Petrov replied. Gravity manipulation, space-time distortion, energy control at the quantum level. The Zephyrians think they are advanced, but compared to the architects, they are children playing with fire. Morrison could feel the panic spreading through the Zephyrian fleet as their crews realized they were completely helpless. Some of the ships were trying to retreat, but the network held them fast. Others were attempting to overload their reactors in suicide attacks. But even that option had been taken away from them. The network is giving us a choice, Morrison realized, the knowledge flowing into his mind from the alien system. We can destroy the Zephyrian fleet right now, or we can send them a message they'll never forget. Through the connection, Morrison could sense his team members considering the options. They had the power to end this battle, maybe even end the entire war right here and now. But they also had the opportunity to do something greater, to prove that humanity was worthy of the architect's legacy. What kind of message? Mills asked. Morrison felt the answer forming in his mind, drawn from the network's vast understanding of galactic politics and interstellar relations. The kind that shows them exactly what they're up against and gives them a chance to choose a different path. The SEALs were seconds from death. Part 6. Morrison felt the weight of decision pressing down on him as the network waited for his choice. Through the crystalline connection, he could sense the trapped Zephyrian fleet. Hundreds of thousands of alien warriors held motionless in space, their most advanced warships reduced to helpless metal coffins by technology they couldn't begin to understand. Rodriguez, can you establish communication with the Zephyrian command ship? Morrison asked. Sir, the network can translate and transmit to any ship in the fleet. They'll hear every word in their own language. Morrison took a deep breath, feeling the responsibility of speaking not just for his team, but potentially for all of humanity. Through the network, he could sense similar moments happening at nexus points across the galaxy, as other human forces discovered the truth about the architect legacy. Zephyrian Fleet, this is Lieutenant Commander Morrison of the United Earth Navy. You are being held by technology that belongs to neither of our species. I am speaking to you through the Architect Network, the same system you have been trying to steal and corrupt for decades. The response came immediately, translated through the network into Morrison's mind. The Zephyrian Fleet Commander's voice was filled with rage and desperation. Human filth. Release our ships immediately or we will turn your homeworld to glass. Morrison felt the network's reaction to the threat, a cold disapproval that rippled through the crystalline structure. The architects had built their system to serve species that had moved beyond such crude aggression, and the Zephyrian response only confirmed the network's judgment. Fleet Commander, your ships will remain exactly where they are until you understand what you're facing. Morrison replied calmly. For 6 years, you've been using stolen access codes to hack into the most basic functions of this network. You've treated it like a tool to be dominated, never realizing that it's been watching and judging every action you take. Through the connection, Morrison could feel Petrov's approval. The Russian had spent 3 years learning the network's true nature, understanding that the architects had built something far greater than simple transportation and communication technology. Your species has had access to nexus points for over 40 years. Morrison continued, drawing on the network's vast memory banks. In that time, you've used them to coordinate the destruction of 17 inhabited worlds, the enslavement of countless populations, and the systematic looting of archaeological sites across this galaxy. The network remembers everything. The silence from the Zephyrian fleet was deafening. Morrison could sense their shock through the network. They had never realized that their actions were being recorded, that the technology they thought they controlled had been documenting their crimes. Torres, can you show them what we're seeing? Morrison asked. Through the network, torrents of data flowed toward the trapped fleet. Tactical displays showing every Zephyrian ship position, logistics networks revealing their supply chains, communication intercepts exposing their battle plans. But more than that, the network was sharing its judgment, its evaluation of Zephyrian civilization as unworthy of the architect's legacy. "This is impossible," the fleet commander's voice cracked with disbelief. "No species has this level of access to the network. The control codes are encrypted beyond any technology." "The control codes you stole give you access to transportation nodes," Morrison interrupted. "But the network itself chooses who to truly serve. For millions of years it has been waiting for species that could use it as the architects intended, not as a weapon of conquest, but as a tool of cooperation and growth." Morrison felt the network reaching out across space, touching other nexus points where human forces were making similar discoveries. On a dozen worlds, human soldiers and scientists were connecting with the architect system, learning its true capabilities, understanding their species' potential place in the galactic community. "Williams, what's your status?" Morrison asked his wounded teammate. "Sir, I'm not just healed, I'm enhanced. The network has improved my reflexes, strengthened my bones, optimized my nervous system. I can see electromagnetic spectra that shouldn't be visible to human eyes." Morrison nodded, unsurprised. The architects had built their network to help worthy species evolve, to push them toward their full potential. For humanity, that meant not just healing wounds, but unlocking capabilities they never knew they possessed. "Fleet Commander," Morrison continued his communication with the Zephyrians, "your ships are being held by defensive systems that were old when your species first looked at the stars. You cannot break free through force, you cannot overload your reactors to escape, and you cannot call for additional support because the network now controls all transportation in this sector." The tactical implications were overwhelming. If the network had truly awakened to human control, then every Zephyrian force in the galaxy was suddenly isolated, cut off from reinforcement and resupply. Their entire strategic doctrine was based on rapid deployment through nexus points. Without that capability, their military advantage evaporated overnight. "What do you want?" the fleet commander finally asked, his voice hollow with defeat. Morrison felt the answer flowing into his mind from the network itself, drawn from the architect's original vision for galactic civilization. "We want you to choose. You can continue down the path of conquest and destruction, fighting a war you can no longer win against species the network has chosen to support. Or you can begin the long process of proving that your people can evolve beyond their current limitations." "You speak of choices we do not have," the commander replied bitterly. "Our culture, our entire way of life, is built around strength and dominance. We cannot simply abandon what we are." "The architects believed that any species could change," Morrison said, feeling the truth of it resonating through the crystalline connection. "They built this network to last for millions of years, to serve civilizations across countless generations. They understood that growth requires time." Through the network, Morrison could sense the Zephyrian crews struggling with concepts their culture had no framework for understanding. For them, power came from domination, success came from conquest, and worth was measured by the ability to impose their will on others. The idea of cooperation, of earning the respect of alien technology through ethical behavior, was almost incomprehensible. "Mills, Rodriguez, what are you picking up from their communications?" Morrison asked. "Sir, there's massive debate across their fleet," Mills reported.
"Some of them are talking about fighting to the death rather than accepting what they see as submission.
But others are asking questions about the network, trying to understand what it would take to gain real access." Morrison felt a spark of hope. If even some Zephyrians were willing to consider change, then perhaps this war could end with something other than the complete destruction of one species or the other. But first, they had to survive the next few minutes. Through the network, Morrison could sense a new threat approaching, a massive Zephyrian dreadnought, larger than anything in the trapped fleet, moving in from the outer system. And unlike the other ships, this one was not being held by the network's defensive systems. The SEALs were seconds from death. Part 7. The approaching dreadnought was something Morrison had never seen before, a massive vessel that seemed to bend space around itself as it moved through the system. Through the network, he could sense its nature, a Zephyrian command ship equipped with technology that predated their species' first contact with the Nexus points. Petrov, why isn't the network stopping that ship? Morrison asked, feeling a chill of concern as the dreadnought continued its approach. Because it carries something the network recognizes, the Russian replied grimly. That ship has an architect aboard. The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. Through their connection to the network, his entire team felt the truth of Petrov's words. Somewhere on that approaching vessel was one of the ancient beings who had built the galactic infrastructure. Somehow still alive after millions of years. That's impossible, Torres whispered. You said the architects were gone. I said they disappeared, Petrov corrected. The network has been searching for them across the galaxy for eons. It appears the Zephyrians found one before we did. Through the crystalline connection, Morrison could feel the network's complex emotions regarding the approaching ship. There was joy at sensing one of its creators still alive, but also deep sorrow and anger at the circumstances. The architect aboard that vessel was not free. It was a prisoner, forced to serve the very species that represented everything its people had sought to transcend. Rodriguez, what can you tell me about that ship? Morrison asked. Sir, it's massive, easily 10 times the size of a heavy cruiser. But the weird thing is, most of it doesn't read as Zephyrian technology. The hull, the power systems, even the weapons, they're all based on architect designs. Morrison understood immediately. The Zephyrians hadn't just captured an architect. They had forced it to build them a vessel using its own people's technology. It was a slavery beyond anything Morrison could imagine, turning one of the galaxy's greatest builders into a tool of destruction. The network wants us to free it, Morrison realized. The knowledge flowing into his mind from the alien system. That's why it's not stopping the dreadnought. It's giving us the chance to rescue one of its creators. Commander, the Zephyrian fleet commander's voice crackled through the communication system. You will release our ships immediately. The scalar ender approaches and it carries power beyond your comprehension. Morrison felt the network's reaction to the ship's name, a cold fury that resonated through every nexus point in the galaxy. The scalar ender was an abomination, a corruption of everything the architects had stood for, and its very existence was an insult to their memory. Williams, how are you feeling about a little extravehicular activity? Morrison asked, an audacious plan forming in his mind. Sir, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking, the network can help. I can feel it offering to enhance our capabilities even further. Through their connection to the system, Morrison's team could sense the network's proposal. It could temporarily transform them into something beyond baseline human. Enhanced strength, improved reflexes, the ability to survive in vacuum for extended periods, and most importantly, the capacity to interface directly with architect technology. Petrov, can the network get us aboard that ship? The Nexus point can transport us anywhere within this system instantaneously, the Russian confirmed. But Commander, you must understand, the architect aboard that vessel has been tortured for decades. It may not trust any organic life form, even humans. Morrison made his decision. Torres, Mills, you stay here and maintain the connection with the network. Rodriguez, Williams, Petrov, we're going to bring our new friend home. The enhancement process was unlike anything Morrison had experienced. Energy flowed through his body from the network, rewriting his genetic code on the fly, optimizing every system for the mission ahead. He could feel his bones becoming denser, his muscles becoming stronger, his nervous system accelerating to superhuman speeds. Transportation to the scalar ender is ready, the network communicated directly into their minds. But be warned, the architect has been broken by centuries of captivity. It may attack before it recognizes your intent. Morrison felt a moment of spatial disorientation, and then he was standing in the corridor of an alien ship. The walls around him pulsed with the same crystalline patterns as the Nexus point. But these patterns were wrong somehow. Twisted, corrupted, forced into configurations that caused them pain. This way, Petrov whispered, his enhanced senses leading them through the maze of corridors. The architect is being held in the ship's core. They encountered no Zephyrian guards. The aliens were all on the bridge, focused on the crisis with their trapped fleet. But Morrison could feel something else aboard the ship. A presence of vast intelligence and equally vast suffering. The ship's core was a cathedral of twisted crystal and alien metal, and at its center was something that made Morrison's enhanced heart race with both wonder and horror. The architect was nothing like he had imagined, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix, its form shifting and flowing like liquid light. But the crystal prison was clearly designed to cause pain, to force compliance through constant agony. Human. The architect's voice resonated directly in their minds, carrying the weight of eons and the pain of endless torment. You carry the touch of the network. How is this possible? We're here to free you, Morrison said, approaching the prison carefully. The network has awakened to human consciousness. It wants you to come home. The architect's form pulsed with disbelief and desperate hope. The network? Awakened? After so long? But the protocols, the safeguards. Your people built the network to serve species that had learned cooperation, Rodriguez explained. Humanity passed the test. Morrison could feel the architect reaching out through the ship's systems, touching the network across impossible distances, confirming what they had told it. The joy that flooded through the connection was overwhelming. After millennia of captivity, one of the galaxy's builders was finally going home. Release mechanism is here, Williams identified, his enhanced vision piercing the alien technology, but it's guarded by Zephyrian security protocols. The architect's laugh was like crystal bells ringing across space. Child, I designed those systems. They were never meant to hold me forever, only until someone worthy came to help. The crystal prison dissolved like morning mist, and the architect's true form blazed with liberated energy. Through the network connection, Morrison could feel the being's power as it took control of the scalar ender, turning the massive vessel from instrument of oppression into tool of justice. The Zephyrian fleet, Morrison said. What do we do with them? The architect's presence filled their minds, vast and ancient but tempered with wisdom. We give them the same choice we gave their species 40 years ago: evolve or face the consequences of their actions. Through the ship's systems, the architect reached out to the trapped Zephyrian fleet. But instead of destruction, it offered them something else: the chance to truly understand what they had been fighting for, to see the galaxy through the eyes of species that had chosen cooperation over conquest. Some will change, the architect told Morrison's team. Others will not. But today, the balance of power in this galaxy has shifted permanently in favor of those who build rather than destroy. As the scalar ender turned toward Earth, carrying word of humanity's acceptance into the galactic community, Morrison felt the network's satisfaction flowing through him. The war was far from over, but for the first time in 6 years, he was confident that humanity would not just survive, they would thrive among the stars. The SEALs had been seconds from death in an alien canyon. Now they were harbingers of a new age, carrying the hopes of two species toward a future none of them could have imagined.